Well, a very warm welcome to all my dear students, viewers and listeners of this program. Once again, I'm back with you with our English subject today, and today we will be discussing on a prose that is Macbeth. I'm sure you have heard of the word or the story Macbeth a lot of times, and today we will be discussing about the story of Macbeth in detail. Macbeth was written by William Shakespeare, and William Shakespeare, let's discuss about our poet, our writer a little bit here. He was born in the year 1564 and died in the year 1616 in the month of April. So altogether he lived for 52 years. William Shakespeare, we have been studying about him a lot of times from your lower classes till the present day. And out of the English literature, William Shakespeare is considered to be the greatest playwright of all times. Even to this present day, people say that there is no one who can compete with Shakespeare in the writings. Shakespeare was a common person, but later on he began writing, and he is considered to be the greatest playwright. When I say playwright, he is a person who writes plays and dramas. We have also been discussing about plays and dramas a lot of times, and here, when I say plays, it did not mean that he wrote only plays. He wrote a lot of poems, he wrote sonnets and stories, but apart from that, plays are one of his specialty, and within 26 years, he was able to write 37 plays. 37 dramas. Here, if we just keep reading, we may not take it in a very serious note, but consider, have you ever written a poem? No. I'm sure many of us will have the answer no. But for William Shakespeare, not only plays did he write, but only his plays alone. Imagine, he had written a lot of poems, but even the dramas, all that he had written was 37 dramas. You can imagine a person writing all those dramas. For me, to write a drama is a little difficult because we don't really put those things into practice. But Shakespeare had done something that the whole world was unable to do. In the whole of English literature, there is nobody and there was nobody who was able to write, and even to this day, there is no great writer like William Shakespeare. And so this is how our poet, our writer here is about. And then Macbeth is a story about Macbeth. It is actually a drama. It is a play written by William Shakespeare, but here we are just reading the compressed version of this drama. We have the shortened form of the drama in a story, and so we will be discussing about the details of the story. Here we will see that the story of Macbeth is all about Macbeth. Macbeth is a person who worked under the King Duncan, the King of Scotland. King Duncan was the King of Scotland, and Macbeth was a general. I'm sure you have heard of the word general. In the army, we have the generals. The generals are the army chiefs. So Macbeth was one of the generals of King Duncan, and Banquo was also a general like Macbeth. And so they were working under King Duncan, and they were very, very faithful towards the king. And the king had two sons. They were Malcolm and Donalbain. Malcolm was the elder son, and Donalbain would be the younger son. So these are the main characters of the story. We will get to know more about that. And getting into the story, let's see. King Duncan was a very good king. Not all kings can be good. We have heard of dictators, even in the history books. They may be leaders, not exactly the king may be, but we have seen a lot of dictators. And all kings are not admired or are not respected by their subjects. Subjects means the people who are under him. And so we see that Duncan was a very good king. He was loved by all his subjects. And that is the reason why he gained the respect. He gained the respect of everyone who was under his rule. And Macbeth was not only a general, but he was also a close relative of the king. He was a close relative of the king, and he was the Thane of Glamis. Glamis is the name of a place, a county, we call it. He was the Thane of a region. Thane here is a title. Let me put this word here. The word Thane here. It is a title given to a person who who is the leader of a particular region. And so Macbeth was also the Thane of Glamis, and he had been going to wars. Obviously, when you live under a king, there will be wars. When there is any rebel army that comes to you, you will have to go to war against them in support of the king. And this is what Macbeth had been doing. He was loved and respected by everyone, not only because he was a close relative of the king. Even if he was a relative of the king, had he been behaving in a rude way, or if his ways of behaving and his ways of treating his subjects are not good, he would not be respected. But he was highly respected because he was also a faithful thane and a general under the king. And this is why Macbeth was loved and respected so much. And he had lately defeated a rebel army. That means an army from the opposing party, from the opponent. He had lately defeated a rebel army assisted by the troops of Norway. Not only him, but with the assistance of some other troops, he was able to defeat a rebel army. And this is the reason why the king was so happy. One day, when Banquo and General Macbeth, these two generals were returning from a war, and then while they were returning back, they were met by some strange creatures. These creatures appeared to be like old ladies with withered skin. Withered, I hope you know that. If you pluck a flower and keep in the sun for a few hours, it gets withered. And so that means they don't have the freshness of the skin. These three ladies were with withered skins, and also they had beards. They looked like women, but they had beards. So this is a strange figure. These are some strange figures that encountered them, and they greeted them. At first, when Macbeth tried to greet them, they seemed to be offended. Offended means feeling bad. They seemed to be offended at first, but later on, they greeted Macbeth as the Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor, and also all hail, for you shall be king thereafter. He was not the king, he was just the Thane of Glamis. Keep in mind, I've told you in the beginning, he was just the Thane of Glamis, and when the three witches, when these three figures came and wished him and saluted him as the Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor, and also the future king of Scotland, he was confused. He could not understand, he was just looking at them. And then Banquo was also with him. So these creatures later turned to Banquo and said, you shall not reign as king, but your children will be the kings of Scotland. That's what they said to him. Both of them were surprised here. Why? Because the king had heirs. Okay, heirs means the ones who will overtake his throne after he dies or after he steps down from the throne. I've told you that the king had two sons, Malcolm and Donalbain. Malcolm, the elder one, and Donalbain, the younger one. And so, if a king had heirs, it's impossible for another person because, kingships are hereditary. If I am the king, my son would obviously be the king again without any formalities there. It is a hereditary process. And so these two generals were very confused when the creatures greeted Macbeth as the king of Scotland. And also to Banquo they said, though he will never reign as king, his children would become king one day. They were shocked at this. And so as soon as they said this, when they were still pondering on this, the creatures disappeared into the air. They vanished, not like any earthly creatures. If a human being comes to you and vanish at once, I'm sure you will have a little bit of confusion there because no earthly creature will have the power to do that. But these creatures vanished all of a sudden into the air. They did not just walk away. And all of a sudden they were seen no more, and these two people were pondering, and finally, as soon as they vanished, they realized that these were witches. These were supernatural creatures. And then they realized that they were witches. Now, as they were still pondering on what it would mean, because they had been given some messages which they did not expect at all, and even if they were expecting, it would be almost impossible, because see, I've told you the king had sons, and if a king, not only one son, he had two sons, if anything happens to one of the son, the other son would take over. But they saw that the predictions were in total contradiction to what the real world is. And so, as they were pondering upon this, there were some messengers sent by the king to greet them. Before they could realize, they could come to the reality, there were some messengers that were sent by the king to greet them. And then these people said, these messengers came to Macbeth and greeted him as the Thane of Cawdor. See, this is a coincidence. The witches also told him that he would be the Thane. He was greeted as the Thane of Cawdor too, though he was only the Thane of Glamis. And so the prediction came true. And so they were surprised to see the coincidence. The witches told something and vanished, and just not very long after that, the messengers came in with the message that he was conferred the title of the Thane of Cawdor. And now this raised some hopes in Macbeth. And he turned to Banquo and asked him, don't you think that your children will rule Scotland someday? But Banquo was wise enough. He said he do not believe in all those things. He said that he doesn't believe in the prophecies, because he also warned Macbeth that these supernatural creatures have the tendency to lead us into and deceive us into doing something that is wrong. But the prophecies of the witches sank too deep into Macbeth's heart that he had the hopes of becoming the king of Scotland someday. Banquo warned him that he should not be following this, because these creatures often lead a person into something that is wrong. But Macbeth was a very ambitious fellow. Ambitious here means very eager to go on to something new, to do something new again. People may consider those things to be difficult, but if you are ambitious, you will still go for those things. Maybe Macbeth was a person like that. And so he believed, he strongly hoped that he would one day become the king of Scotland. And that is the reason why he kept believing, and he was pondering on this thought. But unlike Macbeth, Banquo was never deceived by this prophecy. He did not give any importance, so he just went his way like that. But after reaching his castle, Macbeth was so excited, he told about the prophecies that the witches had given him, to him and also to Banquo. He told his wife about it, and his wife, Lady Macbeth, was no less ambitious in this. She was also a very ambitious lady, and on top of that, she harbored the desire to be the queen. She was not a queen yet. She was just the wife of a Thane. And Macbeth also told her how he was given the title of the Thane of Cawdor as soon as the witches disappeared. And so with all these things coming into reality, both of them got the hopes. And then Lady Macbeth encouraged Macbeth to go on with the hope. But Macbeth was still a little confused, because he knew that he was a close relative of the king and he would be in no position to murder the king. And he also knew that unless the king is murdered, he would not have the throne, because the king has heirs. The king had two sons, and that is the reason why he was still in a confusion. But Lady Macbeth did not lose the hope. She encouraged the husband to go on, and she even planned to murder the king. And not very late after that, the king decided to visit Macbeth in his castle. And so the king and his two sons, along with some people, they came into the castle of Macbeth to honor Macbeth, because he was a very heroic general. And then because of his heroism, he had won wars. He had been given the title of the Thane of Cawdor. Earlier, there was another Thane of Cawdor, but because of his treason, because of his unfaithfulness towards the king had taken away that title and given to Macbeth. And not only the title that was conferred to him, he also came personally to Macbeth's castle to honor him and also to give him gifts. These are the things that he did. And then when he came, Lady Macbeth acted so well to them. She was the most kindest hostess, the king said. She was a very kind hostess towards them. With all the hospitality, the king was so impressed with this lady. Indeed, the book says that Lady Macbeth was a serpent under a flower. In her outer appearance, she behaved so well to the king. Her hospitality was incomparable. The king was impressed by it, and that is the reason why she was also gifted jewels and diamonds, and also some other gifts to the people living in the castle of Macbeth. And so these are the things that the king had given. But deep within her, we know that she had some plans going on in her mind. And she was happier to know that the king had finally come to her castle. Now it would be easy for her to carry out the plans that she had been planning in her minds. The king was greeted so well. He was happy with the hospitality of the lady, with the hostess. And now, with the long day's journey, I'm sure they had been traveling a lot. With the whole day's journey, the king was tired, and then he wanted to have a good rest. After receiving all the hospitality from the lady, now the king retired to his bed to rest along with his men who came along with him, the two sons and also the other persons. As we know, a king would not be traveling alone. There would be a lot of people who are his security. So, keeping all this, now they thought that they are in safe place, because the king knew that Macbeth was a very faithful general under him, and not only that, they were close relatives. And I'm sure all of us, if we are at a close relative's place, we don't feel any insecurity. We are always at peace of mind because we know that we are safe there. But this was something that Macbeth and his wife were not planning to give them. They were not in safe place actually. They were planning to murder the king. But the king did not have any of such things, because earlier, according to the qualities that Macbeth had, the king considered Macbeth to be a very faithful person. And that is the reason why he was retiring there. He was resting there with full confidence, and he was having a deep sleep. So Lady Macbeth, though she was encouraging Macbeth to kill, Macbeth did not want it, because he knew that the king was loved by all his subjects. All his subjects means everyone who are under the king loved the king, because from the beginning we have discussed that the king was a good king. Duncan was a very good king, and that is the reason why everyone loved Duncan. And Macbeth knew that if he happened to kill Duncan, he would really be avenged. The people under the king would revenge the king for whatever he had done. And so Macbeth knew that, and also on top of that, he did not want to spoil his reputation. Macbeth had a very good reputation in front of all the people under the king of Duncan. And if he killed the king, not only the revenge, they will surely take the revenge for the death of Duncan. But not only that, his reputation would be tarnished. That means would be spoiled. He had been having a very good reputation so far because he had been faithful to the king. And once he murdered the king, you know how you will look at a person who murders. Even if you have a very good friend, if that friend happens to betray somebody or go and be a good person in the class, in the class you have a lot of things that your teachers don't know. There are some people who are quite innocent in front of the teachers, but they may be doing something when the teachers leave. So even to those persons, you lose your respect towards them. So imagine a general under the king, murdering the king, how badly his reputation would be tarnished, how badly his reputation will be spoiled. Keeping all these things in mind, he was reluctant. And also, he told Lady Macbeth that the king was his guest tonight. You know what is a guest? A person who is in your place will be your guest, and you are the host. And so, as the host of the king, Macbeth knew that it was his duty to protect the king. Even if he wanted to kill the king and become the king himself, it would not be a proper time, because when somebody is at your place, whether you like that person or not, you still have to protect it. we all hear about how our traditions are. When somebody does something wrong and comes to your place to take refuge, to get security, even if you do not like that person, if it's your duty to protect that person. And the same thing happened with Macbeth here. Even if he wanted to kill the king, as long as the king was in his place, it would be wrong on his part to kill the king, because as his host, it should be his duty to protect the king. He gave some very good reasons like this. It's my duty to protect my king, and on top of that, now I'm a close relative of the king, and the king had so much respect for me, and moreover, everyone under the king respected Macbeth for his faithfulness. These are the reasons that he gave to the lady. But Macbeth's wife, that is Lady Macbeth, will not accept this. She just told him that once he murdered the king, once the king is killed, there would be no other problem. You would be the king. These are the reasons that she had been using to encourage Macbeth. But knowing pretty well that even though Macbeth was ambitious, we know that Macbeth was a very ambitious person, but he was also kind at heart. And so the lady knew that Macbeth would not do this work easily. She just took that dagger in her hands and she walked into the room where the king lay asleep. The king was just sound asleep, with full confidence that he was in a safe place, in safe hands. So when the lady entered the room, he was sleeping soundly. The lady could not kill, because when she entered, she saw that the king's face resembled her own father. See, it's going to be very difficult for anyone in this whole world to kill your own parents. Though the king was not the father of Lady Macbeth, she entered the room and saw that the king's face resembled her father a lot. That is the reason why she was reluctant to kill, and she came back and she encouraged Macbeth, and she also blamed him of being fickle, being changeable anytime. He decided to kill the king, but he also was reluctant, and so she blamed him and also blamed him of cowardice, that he was not brave enough. Maybe she is using a lot of words that ladies would use. She would say that you are a man, why can't you do this? After you kill the king, you would be the king yourself. And so whom are you fearing? These are the words that Lady Macbeth had been using to encourage Macbeth to go and kill. After all this encouragement, Macbeth took the dagger in his hand and he entered the king's room. And so when he stabbed the king to death, there were two grooms, there were two people with the king. They will be there to look after the king. And so there were two people looking after the king, and these two people one was laughing a lot, and the other one began to scream words. You will see that in your textbook. The other one began to shout, and then finally their voices woke each other up. Even in their sound sleep, maybe they got some dreams, and so their voices woke one another up. They just woke up, but they did not have any suspicion that anything wrong would have happened to the king. And that is the reason why they did not even bother to look at the king. They just woke up, saw each other, said their short prayers, and went back to sleep. This is what we usually do, right? When we have a bad dream in the middle of the night, you just wake up, you say your prayers. Maybe you are scared or may not be, but when you see a bad dream, this is what we usually do. These two grooms woke up, and then they said their prayers and went back to sleep. Nobody knew that the king would have been murdered, because they were in the castle of Macbeth, who was also a very faithful person to the king. And so they just went back to bed. In the morning, when Macbeth and Lady Macbeth was still there on the bed, people began to discuss of that. They discovered that their king, Duncan, was murdered. And so everyone began to wonder why these things could have happened in the castle of Macbeth. And even these two people, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, they pretend to be in grief. They made a pretense of grieving towards the king's death. They were mourning for the king. But all the suspicion fell on these two fellows. They were suspected because in their place, who else would dare to enter and kill this king? This is the reason why everyone began to suspect them. And the two sons also got the same suspicion. They realized, Donalbain and Malcolm realized that their stay in Scotland would be harmful. It would be dangerous for them to be in Scotland, so they decided to flee their kingdom. Malcolm decided to join the English courts, and Donalbain took the refuge of Ireland. They went to different places. They could have gone together, but they thought that it would be better for them to stay separated. If anyone aims to attack them again, they would be safe if they were in different places. And also, they promised each other that they would raise their armies there. And so with all these preparations, the two princes left. They went to different places because they really realized, now they realize that whoever is after the king would surely be after them too. Because without any reason, there would not be anyone killing a person. They knew that whoever had murdered their father wanted to be the king. And that is the reason why the father had been murdered. And so if the father had been murdered, that person, whoever it is, will know that one of these two sons will take over the throne. And if they were still here in Scotland, they knew that they would not be in safe place. And so they decided to flee. They went there, and now the king had declared himself as the king. Now, he was not the king yet. Macbeth, after the murder of the king, declared himself as the king. But there were also a lot of people who were under his rule out of compulsion. They did not really like the king, but if you are living under the kingship authority, here we do not have any such practices here, so we will not have much knowledge about this. But the kings have authorities up to the extent where you cannot even question them. We live in a democratic world. We live in a democratic country. We all know that India is a country famous for democracy, and we have the right to question our leaders. But if you were to live under the monarchs, under the kings, you will have no power to question the king, even if you don't like it. And so, there were many people who were under the rule of Macbeth, though they do not like his kingship, because that is their only option. If they want to live in Scotland peacefully, they would have to follow whatever the king, that is the self-declared King Macbeth. They would have to follow whatever this king says. And so they're living under this. I'm sure once he ascends the throne, Macbeth would give a feast, a party. And so he had given a very big party for all the nobles. That means for all the high-ranking officials under his kingship in the whole of Scotland. All the nobles of Scotland were invited to his feast. And when the feast was already prepared, Banquo was also going to a feast. I'm sure it's this feast, but he was ambushed. You know what is ambushed? People attacked Banquo while he was still on his way. And then his son was killed. No, his son fled, not killed. His son fled, and then Banquo was killed. Macbeth was scared of Banquo. Remember when the witches first visited them? He was along with Banquo. And so the witches prophesied that Macbeth should beware of Banquo's children. Not beware of Banquo's children, but the witches told that Banquo's children would rule Scotland one day. And Banquo also began to suspect Macbeth for the murder of the king, because he knew very well that the witches prophesied that Macbeth would one day be the king. And so with all these prophecies, he also knew that Macbeth believed the prophecies that were given by the witches. And he would be the person who would surely kill the king. And so even though nobody declared it openly, everybody began to suspect Macbeth. And so after Macbeth knew that Banquo was suspecting him, and also that his children would one day become king, he was fearful of the future. He was having a lot of apprehensions. Apprehensions means scared of what is yet to come. So his apprehensions led him to kill Banquo. He sent his men to kill Banquo. And in this process, Banquo was killed in the ambush, whereas his son fled to join one of the princes. And in the party, he knew that Banquo was killed now. He's feeling a little secure because there would be no one to reveal the secrets that he had heard from the witches. But in the party, maybe they were having a lot of fun, merrymaking, dance, food and drinks, or whatever they needed to enjoy. As a king, you can imagine of how things would be in a party. And so this is something that was happening, but in the middle of the party, Macbeth saw Banquo's ghost coming to him, the ghost of Banquo. He knew that Banquo was killed by his men, but now he saw that Banquo's ghost was there at the party again. And so he began to behave in a very mysterious way. And everyone under his kingship began to lose their faith and hope in him. See, he was behaving in such a way. If you were to have a leader, a president, a minister who behaves in crazy ways and does not act like a normal person, I'm sure your hope and faith in that particular leader would go down. You would not want to have such type of leaders. And so Macbeth was the king. He was not an ordinary leader. He was the king of Scotland, and their kingdom was ruled by Macbeth. And then he began to behave in such a way. His movements were very awkward. And then the people began to suspect of things. They did not like his kingship. From the beginning, there were many people who were against his kingship, and now after seeing his movements and the way he behaves in the big crowd, they began to lose their hope in him. But Lady Macbeth, he was a lady who can cover up so many things. We have seen from the beginning, when the king came, she hosted the king and his men with full of kindness, and the king also gave him presents, gave him gift because of her hospitality. Though she had some plans behind that face. And this is the reason Lady Macbeth tried to make a cover. She said she tried to neutralize everything, and then things came back to normal. But even after this incident, they were still not in peace. And how can they be in peace without any reason, with just the hope to become the king? They murdered a king who was loved by everyone, who was so kind and good towards his subjects. These are the things that they have been going through. But these two people, Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, were never in peace now. And that is the reason why they decided, and every time Lady Macbeth began to walk, saying that her hands were stained with blood. Though there was no literal blood on her hand, she had the guilt conscious. She had the feeling of guilty that she had done something wrong. And that is the reason why she had been doing this. And Macbeth was also having the same disturbances in his mind. They were never filled with peace now. And when these things were still going on, Macbeth was so curious. And then he visited the cavern of the witches the second time. He was feeling a little apprehensive, and so he went to visit the cavern of the witches. And then they showed him a sequence of demons. Not only one. That means there were so many demons there. And then they told him that he would not be killed by any man born of a woman. But he also told that he had to beware of Macduff. Macduff was a general under the king of Duncan. He fled to join one of the sons of the king. And so he had to beware of Macduff, but he would not be killed by any man born of woman. On top of that, the witches also told that he will never be killed unless the Burnham would come to Dunsinane Castle. Dunsinane Castle is the castle where Macbeth lived. And so he knew that mountains and forests can never move. And one more thing that added to his faith was that all men are born of woman. He was satisfied with this. He came back. But later on, he learned that the two princes, that is Malcolm and Donalbain, they were able to set up their army there, one in Ireland and one in England. And so they challenged Macbeth for a battle there. And Macbeth was all settled for this, but he was scared a little bit, but he knew that he will never be killed by any man born of woman, and that forest cannot move. And so with this hope, he fortified. That means he built protection over his castle, the Dunsinane Castle, and then he was there in the midst of those bad information, bad messages that he had been receiving. Adding more to his difficulty is that Lady Macbeth had taken her own life. She had been going through a lot of disturbances. Now we saw this. And then when everything was coming against him, there were a lot of resistance towards his kingship, even under his own kingdom. And now the princes from outside were coming to have a battle with him. In the middle of all these circumstances, his wife, Lady Macbeth, killed herself. And this added a big blow to him. But he still got ready for the battle, keeping faith that he will come out victoriously. And so he encountered these troops in the battlefield. They came. But before that, people cut boughs, that means the branches of Burnham wood, from the forest of Burnham, and then they were coming towards Dunsinane Castle. And so half of the witch's prophecy is considered, had come to process now. It had come to be proven that these prophecies can be true, and Macbeth was losing hope. It appears that the whole of Burnham Forest was coming towards Dunsinane, though they only cut the boughs, the branches of the trees, and they were marching. And when they looked from far, it appears as if the whole mountain was moving towards them. And finally, he had to face these people in the battlefield. And while they were having a very ferocious battle there, he encountered Macduff. Macduff, who was prophesied by the witches to tell him that he should beware of Macduff. And in this process, now they got to know that he had to beware of Macduff, but in this meantime, Macbeth told Macduff not to try, because the witches told him that he would never be murdered by a person who was born of a woman. In this, Macduff told him that he was not of a woman born, but he was born, he was ripped open from his mother's womb, what we call the cesarean section in the present day. And so he was untimely. Before the time of delivery, he was ripped from his mother's womb. This is what Macduff told him. Macbeth lost all hopes there, but he continued to fight because there was no other option. Macduff killed Macbeth and beheaded him. And so this is how the witches' prophecies came to be fulfilled. And see, we remember, Macbeth was killed by Macduff, who was not born of woman, but was untimely ripped. You can also remember what Banquo said to Macbeth, that these creatures have the tendency to deceive people into doing things that are wrong. And this had proven to be true. Whatever Banquo said to Macduff, who knows, the witches prophesied something, but if he just kept waiting because he was a faithful person, the king might also give him the throne out of his will. But he could not wait. He was also encouraged by the treacherous Lady Macbeth. And these are the things that went wrong because Macbeth gave his belief into the prophecy that was given by the witches. This proved that he was led into doing something wrong by the witches. And from this lesson, we can also understand that if we are to work just with our ambitious nature, without keeping in mind what is right and wrong, it's never wrong to have ambitious minds, but if you do not learn how to decide what is right and wrong, you will also land up in a difficult situation like Macbeth. He lost his reputation, and also at last he ended his life, his family. All these things happened to him. If he were just to be faithful to the king like he had been behaving, he might have been in a better position, in a very peaceful mind, but he could not wait for these opportunities. And this is how he ended his life. And I'm sure you enjoyed listening to this story. And with this, we are coming to the end of this chapter. Once again, requesting all my dearest students to keep in touch with your book, keep going through your books, because after reading your books, only you will be able to get the whole idea of the story once again. Thank you.